So you've heard that what you eat can affect ADHD, but you've also heard so much conflicting nutrition advice that you don't even know what to believe. I get it. You know how I would describe most of the common advice we hear about what to eat for ADHD? Shockingly bad. So today I'm attacking the BS information and I'm naming names because what you eat does affect ADHD. And so this is something you want to get right. No one is safe from my attack. I'm going to be laying everything out on the table, from sources of big-time corruption in the nutrition world, all the way down to ignorance and half-true advice that we're getting from TikTok dietitians. I'm going to make a ton of enemies in this video, and that's a price I'm willing to pay. So if you're confused by all the conflicting nutrition information out there, and you just want the facts, then you won't want to miss this. Let's go. If I Google nutrition for ADHD, the first thing that pops up is an article on WebMD. The first thing they recommend to help with ADHD symptoms is a high protein diet. Oh boy, here we go. This advice is being parroted all over the place these days. Get your protein, gotta have that protein snack. Now there's no doubt about it, we need protein. Among serving other functions in the body, proteins are often called the building blocks of life. But here's the thing. As an energy source, protein ain't so hot. It's neither a quick nor efficient fuel, as protein itself can't really be used for energy. It has to be converted to glucose first. So I don't like this suggestion, WebMD, of eating a high protein diet, because you're not telling us how much to eat of the other stuff. So someone could easily look at this advice and think that they should just eat a bunch of skinless chicken breast and all will be well. Whereas I know that that's probably gonna make you pretty hungry, as I've seen it happen countless times in others and I've experienced it myself. What would I change this advice to? Eat a high fat, moderate protein, low carb diet. That way you get the protein your body needs and can focus on using fat as an energy source instead of carbs. By doing this, you'll not only make sure you get enough essential fatty acids from the fat, which are vital to brain health, but you'll also be reducing your blood sugar swings and reversing insulin resistance if that's something you suffer from, and so many of us do. This can help to calm ADHD symptoms big time. This way of eating has also been shown to reduce brain inflammation, improve the gut microbiome, boost neurotransmitter function, and even get our genes working more the way they should. Not too shabby, right? The next recommendation in the WebMD article is to get more complex carbohydrates. It says, quote, "Your body needs carbohydrates because it converts them into glucose for energy." So this is false. While we do need some glucose to survive, we do not need to eat it. Your body is perfectly capable of making all the glucose it needs. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. And anyone who tells you that there is wrong and you should stop listening to them immediately. Let me say that again for the folks in the back. Anyone who tells you that you need carbohydrates to survive is full of beans, which have a lot of carbs, by the way, and can make you very unpopular in elevators. And here comes another recommendation from the same article over at WebMD. They say to avoid unhealthy fats. I couldn't agree more, except that the fats that they claim are unhealthy are actually perfectly healthy. Breathe in, breathe out. Y'all, I'm lucky that my blood pressure tends to be on the lower side because if it weren't, I'd have had a stroke by now. For real. This stuff makes me so angry. Does it make you angry too? Where are you in all of this? I'd love to hear what you think, whether you agree or disagree with what I'm saying. All right, so the fats that good old WebMD are telling us to avoid are saturated fats. Now, if you really want to dive into how saturated fat became demonized, there's an amazing book called The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz. The book goes into it, but the very short version is that there was a theory that saturated fat could cause heart disease, and that theory has never been proven. And the US and other governments just ran with it. And here we are some 70 years later, still hearing this stuff on WebMD. Sorry. If you don't believe me, that's okay. I didn't believe this stuff either the first time I heard it. All my life, I grew up hearing that I needed to limit my saturated fat, that it was gonna clog up my arteries. But if you go back about 150 years, we used to eat tons of saturated fat, and heart disease was simply not the common disease that it is today. So that's a clue right there that the logic is flawed. So WebMD tells us to avoid these foods. They don't say limit, they say avoid. Quote, "Foods fried or baked using saturated fats such as butter, ghee, lard, coconut oil, and palm oil Dairy products such as cream, yogurt, cheese, and whole or 2% milk, meats including poultry, lamb, pork, and beef. End quote. Those are all the things they told us to flat out avoid. So let's unpack this, shall we? It looks like we're only allowed to have skim milk, according to them. Babies of the world, I regret to inform you that if you stay on that breast, you're setting yourself up for a heart attack. Like, do you see how ridiculous this is? The only acceptable milk, according to them, is skim milk, something which doesn't even occur in nature. I'm so angry that I believed this for the first 4 decades of my life and was basically always hungry and frequently overweight. As for the no butter, no coconut oil, etc. Well, first of all, they're not pure saturated fats. They're a mixture. But yes, they are predominantly saturated fats. Butter's fat content, for example, is about 70% saturated fat, 25% monounsaturated fat, and a smidge of polyunsaturated fat. Olive oil, on the other hand, is about 73% monounsaturated fat, 14% saturated fat, and 10% polyunsaturated fat. So very, very different numbers here. So this idea that butter is pure saturated fat and that you can avoid saturated fat by just having olive oil is false. There's saturated fat in olive oil as well. Sorry if it sounds like I'm pooping in your hummus there. Okay, that was a bit of a visual, sorry. But there's something more important than WebMDs erroneously calling butter a purely saturated fat. It's that vegetable oils, which are not really made from vegetables, hello marketing, are very artificial substances that only began to be part of our diet once we had factories to make them in. Instead of calling them vegetable oils, a better name for them would be industrial seed oils, but that doesn't sound quite so healthy now, does it? And here I'm talking about things like corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil. They've been shown to be very inflammatory. And if used in cooking, it's even worse, especially if these oils are reheated multiple times. So by telling us to stay away from saturated fats, this article in WebMD about nutrition for ADHD is pushing us towards one of 2 crappy options. One is to potentially lean on these industrial seed oils, which, again, long story short, are just not healthy. The other option is to lower fat altogether. We tried that in the 80s and 90s and it didn't really work out now, did it? Because remember, protein on its own is not really the best fuel source. So without fat, you need to go pretty heavy on the carbs for energy. And this can really throw both your body and your mind for a loop for so many reasons. And a funny thing about this WebMD article is that in the section where they are encouraging a high protein diet, they mention meat as a good source of protein. Whereas later, when they're railing against saturated fat, they put pretty much every type of meat on the no list. So which one is it? Make up your mind, guys. By the way, did you know that WebMD gets a ton of money from pharma? So yeah, it's not surprising that they have these recommendations, which are frankly harmful and not based in any sort of science, and that many doctors and dietitians are still pushing on their patients. It's just not in the best interest of WebMD for us to get healthy, because then their sponsors won't have anyone to sell pills to. The article also says that saturated fat raises both your good and bad levels of cholesterol, and that high levels of LDL, or bad cholesterol here, I'm quoting them, can put you at risk for heart disease. This is completely false. Saturated fat is not bad for you. In fact, it's something that I think most of us should work on getting more of in our diets. If you've been hanging around keto or carnivore spaces for a while, this is nothing new to you. But I still hear this recommendation to lower saturated fats thrown around everywhere by doctors, nurses, and dietitians. Shame on all of you. You have blood on your hands. I said it and I meant it. I know that's what you were taught in school, but it's wrong. They go on in the article to say that the American Heart Association recommends keeping saturated fat between 5 and 6% of your daily calories. If you like reading about corruption, greed, and downright evil, I encourage you to look at the sponsors of the American Heart Association. This association does not care if you live, die, or suffer. They receive a boatload of financing from big pharma companies and really got their big break back in 1948 when Procter & Gamble gave them a ton of money. Procter & Gamble are the makers of Crisco, which is a large substitute made from cottonseed oil. Around the time that they got all this money, the AHA coincidentally began recommending products like Crisco, saying they were heart healthy. To the American Heart Association, I say, you can suck my decaf. It's pretty good. And by extension, WebMD, for citing the American Heart Association as a credible source of information, can also join in on said sucking. Come find me down here in Colombia if you want to talk. Salud. And if it sounds like I'm picking on WebMD, well, I am. But these same recommendations are being echoed all over the place. So really, I'm picking on anyone who's spouting this utter garbage of nutrition advice. And if you still believe in this garbage, I can't say that I blame you. I used to believe in it too. I took it as gospel because I have so much faith in science. The problem is, these recommendations were made without the use of science. They were, to use a technical term, pulled out of various buttholes. But you know what? That WebMD site is huge, and it pops up on the first page for so many searches related to health. So we can't deny that it's influential. So let's look at more of the awful advice in the WebMD's article on nutrition for ADHD. The article goes on to say that if you're looking for the best diet to follow as a human with ADHD, you should have more complex carbohydrates. Can you guess what my reaction to this might be? The article says, in reference to complex carbohydrates, quote, "These are the good guys." We've been told for so long now that as long as you've got some fiber in there, you can basically do whatever you want. It's like carbs are the sins and fiber is the confessional that washes them all away. Guys, sorry to break it to you, but it doesn't really work that way. At the end of the day, complex carbohydrates break down into simple sugars in the body. If you have a complex carb versus a simple carb, will your blood sugar response be blunted or slowed down? Well, maybe a little bit, but maybe not as much as you think. If you don't believe me, you can see for yourself and test your blood glucose after eating various foods to see how your body responds. You might be shocked. Meanwhile, fiber is really not all it's cracked up to be. Lots of people really struggle when consuming a lot of fiber. It causes gastrointestinal issues in many people and frankly is not an essential nutrient. So here's my take on this. If simple carbs really spike your blood sugar, and complex carbs raise your blood sugar a fair amount and can cause tummy troubles, and if we do not need carbs or fiber to survive, can we please change the messaging around carbs already? They are optional. Some people can handle a pretty high amount, that's true. But for many people, myself included, they are more trouble than they're worth. It's especially important to point out that many of us with ADHD have a real problem with carbs. Many of us are sugar addicts. Many of us eat emotionally. And lots of us are prone to impulsivity. Add to this that most ADHDers are pretty stressed out and don't always sleep so great, and you've got a recipe for unhealthy habits. Meanwhile, these high-carb diets that most of us are on, hell, that are recommended by our doctors, dietitians, and even our own governments, can really wreak havoc on our brains in a variety of ways. One such way is that our brains can literally be swimming in sugar, but unable to use it properly. Because repeated exposure to an excess of carbohydrate can cause insulin resistance, including at the blood-brain barrier. So we can have this candied brain, but not be able to properly tap into the energy there. This leads to something called glucose hypometabolism, which you can probably guess means underusing of glucose. Check out Dr. Georgia Eads' book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, for more information on this topic. In fact, many ADHD medications actually work by helping the brain use glucose temporarily. But the cool thing is, you can also get the same effect in your brain simply by changing what you feed yourself, so that you eventually switch from being this sugar burner that can't really burn sugar very well anymore to somebody that runs on cleaner fuels. Meanwhile, it's important to note that as ADHDers, we are more likely to suffer from Alzheimer's disease as we get older. So doing everything we can to prevent this now is of the utmost importance, no matter what age we are. The science on this, while new, is clear. This condition of the brain swimming in sugar, but unable to properly use it, is the main factor in the development of Alzheimer's. But okay, WebMD, you just keep telling us to eat those carbs. You guys see how maddening this all is? All right, I've lambasted WebMD enough. Let's move on to some more common advice about what the best way to eat is if you have ADHD. Let's check out the CHADD website. I'm a member of CHADD. I signed up to be listed in their directory of ADHD coaches. So since I'm a member of CHADD, I'm not going to say anything bad about them, right? I mean, what if they pull me from their ADHD coach directory? Or deny me the chance to publish articles for their website or speak at their conferences? I don't care. I'm on a mission to cut through the crap And CHADD is part of the crap. Why do I say this? They receive a boatload of funding from pharma, including from the company that makes 2 of the most popular ADHD medications. So even though they're ostensibly a charity, it's in their best interest to push the medication first agenda. And it's not in their best interest to recommend diet and other lifestyle changes that don't involve pills. Guys, why is nobody talking about this in the ADHD space? These organizations have been bought off. So with that in mind, let's see what CHADD has to say about nutrition for ADHD. My expectations are lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. So, right off the bat, they say, quote, "A healthy diet can provide an effective complementary approach to alleviating some symptoms of ADHD." So, what's the subtext here? Complementary approach. Take your medication, everyone. And that's the message most people in the ADHD space will tell you. Medication first. In fact, there's a prominent ADHDer on YouTube called How to ADHD, and she says that not recommending medication as a first-line treatment is a form of shaming people with ADHD. It's not. It's simply offering another option. It's not a moral failing to be on ADHD medication, just as it's not a badge of honor not to be on ADHD medication. I believe in giving people options and giving people all the information. Am I biased towards lifestyle and food-based recommendations? Yep, 100%. But that bias doesn't prevent me from pointing out that the ADHD space is heavily skewed toward the medication route. And this article on ADHD nutrition from CHADD is no exception. Instead of listing out suggestions for what to eat if you have ADHD, CHADD took the laziest to lazy-ass approach and just linked to the US dietary guidelines. Guys, come on, do better. You couldn't have at least run that through ChatGPT or something and given us a summary? The US dietary guidelines are a 68-page PDF that literally no one will read. I tried reading it, and it looks like basically the same stuff that the WebMD article is saying. So skim milk, canola oil, blah, 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 you know the drill. They go on to say, quote, "Some people think that dietary supplements improve symptoms of ADHD. Scientists have found no proof of this idea." Well, there have been some studies showing improvement in ADHD symptoms with supplements. So while we don't have proof, as that's not really how science usually works, there's evidence to show that supplementation may be able to help. My personal stance on supplements is that most of them are a waste of money. But I have come across studies that have used these ultra high grade supplements and have gotten some results. So again, even though I'm not a big fan of supplements in general, even I can say that this statement that CHADD is making, that supplements don't work at all, is false. Let's get cynical. I think that CHADD's being influenced by Big Pharma and that's why they've written that. They want to keep ADHD meds on a pedestal and say that nothing else even has the slightest chance of improving symptoms. So don't forget to fill that prescription at a pharmacy near you and tip your bartenders. The CHADD article continues. They go on to talk about the practical side of healthy eating. They mention that things like meal planning and cooking can be challenging for those of us with ADHD. And so many of us wind up ordering in instead of cooking, and that restaurant food, quote, often lacks important nutrients that your body needs, end quote. Now, I agree with this somewhat. I agree that grocery shopping, meal planning, and cooking can be challenging for anyone, let alone someone with ADHD, as we may have challenges when it comes to things like time management, prioritization, and just getting organized. On the other hand, some people like me have the problem where they get in the kitchen and they just don't want to get out. So sometimes I'm in there for 2 or 3 hours instead of doing other things on my to-do list. So I think I might be the exception to the rule because I love cooking, but most of the ADHD people that I talk to aren't the biggest fans. Now, that being said, here's one of the reasons why I like diets like carnivore or keto, but meat-heavy keto for people who have ADHD. On a carnivore diet, for example, your dinner might just be a big ribeye steak. And so the preparation is basically just throwing it on something hot. There's no fretting over sourdough starter, trying to eat the rainbow, which I think is misguided advice, by the way. This obsession with having 25 different vegetables at every meal really just complicates your life. If you do want to have some kind of, little piece of vegetable here or there, you could try just having one cucumber and cutting it up instead of trying to make this elaborate, Food Network worthy salad every time. Meanwhile, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there are ways to eat healthy without cooking at all. So in this regard, I totally disagree with the CHADD website. Even at places like McDonald's, you can order off the a la carte menu and just get something like hamburger patties and butter. I've heard that you can actually get real butter there. It's worth a try. Yeah, it takes some creativity and, let's be honest, some confidence to go into a restaurant and ask for this kind of special thing that's not really on the menu. But it's doable, and it gets easier with practice. So if you're really in a situation right now where cooking just seems impossible, why not just accept that and stop beating yourself up and look for ways to eat healthy food? There are ways to eat healthy that don't mean that you have to cook. There's nothing noble in the struggle. Okay, also on this page on the CHADD website about nutrition for ADHD, it links to a video where a psychiatrist named Dr. Roberto Olivardia mentions that those of us with ADHD are more, quote, externally oriented than internally, so that our hunger cues and satiety aren't really there. Well, first of all, I don't really like the way he said that. He's basically saying that people with ADHD have no concept of hunger or fullness at all, and that's not exactly the case. The whole story is more complicated than that. And there are two different things. There are hunger cues and there are satiety or fullness cues. So first, hunger cues. So something that does happen to many of us with ADHD is that we forget to eat sometimes. We might be really focused on something and then all of a sudden, oops, lunchtime has come and gone. So I will agree with Dr. Olivardia on that. Also, to add to the issue, many of the medications that are commonly prescribed for ADHD have appetite-suppressing effects, as do medications like SSRIs for depression, which many of us are also prescribed. But it's important to mention that most of us, ADHD or not, are dealing with messed up hunger signals. Most of the food in a modern diet is so far removed from the food that we evolved eating. And unfortunately, it appears that our bodies are not really handling this very well. In the US, for example, statistics say that 73% of our food supply is ultra-processed foods. So on average, even though we may be eating a lot, we're not getting all the nutrients that we require. So we're still hungry, so we eat more. Or we eat foods that are hard to stop eating, and then we beat ourselves up for having no willpower, when in fact, these foods are designed in a lab to override willpower and addict us to them. This isn't a problem that's unique to ADHDers. Might it be a bigger problem for us? Yeah, because we have a higher tendency toward addiction. And many of these fake pseudo foods function really more like drugs than food in our bodies. So while staying away from things like sugar can be hard for most people, they can be just that little bit harder for those of us with ADHD. So I do agree with the CHADD website on that point. But that said, we really have to pick this apart and see how much of this is an ADHD thing and how much of this is a poor diet thing that applies to everyone. Because the closer we get to a nutrient-dense, whole foods diet, the better our hunger and satiety signals work, ADHD or not. So I kind of agree but kind of disagree with what that doctor had to say. He then goes on in the video to say that many of us skip breakfast, that it really is the most important meal of the day. Really? Why? Did you know that there's actually a breakfast lobby in the United States that talks to the government to try to push breakfast on us? You literally cannot make this stuff up. The doctor then says that when we skip breakfast, we're sending our metabolism into a very low point. This is not true, and I disagree with this completely. Then there's another video on the website by the same doctor where he says, quote, "The first thing I tell people with ADHD is just eat breakfast, even if you're not hungry, even if you ate the night before." No, I really do not like this idea of forcing yourself to eat ever. When it comes to food, we've really lost the plot. It's supposed to be an enjoyable experience, not an item on our to-do list. I think that this is terrible advice. In general, those of us with ADHD have interest-based brains. That means that it's just that little bit harder for us to do something that we feel like we have to do. So walking around telling yourself, just eat breakfast. That's me whipping myself like a monk. Just eat breakfast. Do it. I don't know, man. I really don't see that working. What other advice you got for me, Doc? just get a planner? Ooh, gee, thanks. I'm cured. All right, up next, let's look at ADDitude Magazine. Now, when I first got diagnosed with ADHD, I was all over this website. I listened to their podcasts almost nonstop, but I did a little Googling, and guess what? ADDitude Magazine is owned by our friends, WebMD. Wow. So it's safe to say that they also receive sponsorship from pharma. They have a medical advisory panel and claim to uphold strict editorial standards, but I'll admit I'm skeptical. So ADDitude Magazine has an article called Why Sugar is Kryptonite, ADHD Diet Truths, which pops up on the first page of Google if you Google ADHD Nutrition. So here's the sub-headline. Does an ADHD diet work? Yes. Following an ADHD nutrition plan rich in protein and vitamins can help control symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but only if you avoid sugar, artificial flavors, and common allergens as well. Here's what to eat and what to avoid. Okay, again, we're a little off base with the protein thing. We also need fat, especially the fatty acids EPA and DHA, which are found in animal products. And yes, we need protein, but again, protein should not be our main macronutrient in our diet, as again, it's harder to turn into energy. And if it is turned to energy, it will be turned to glucose. Whereas fat, when broken down, whether that's fat on your plate or fat on your face, gets broken down into ketones, which are a cleaner burning source of energy. Now, I want you to notice something else in the subheadline. It says, only if you avoid sugar, artificial flavors, and common allergens as well. That's a bit of a mess here. Yes, in general, it's a good idea to avoid sugar as much as possible. But if you're on a therapeutic diet like keto or carnivore for a year, and let's say one day you fall off the wagon and have some candy, that's not going to undo an entire year's worth of progress. You may feel a little wacky for a day or two after that, or you may feel totally fine. You will still get the majority of the benefits of the diet, even with a little slip up here or there. In terms of artificial colors, it's the same story. If you're doing great on the diet and you have a little slip up and have some Skittles or whatever, it's not the end of the world. You might be a little hyper or something or cranky, but again, it's not going to derail all of your progress. It's not black or white. So I don't like the way they've painted this, because when they do it like this in this kind of all or nothing, you must avoid all this stuff or else, then what happens is, people will say, well, I can't do that. I can't do that perfectly. Or my kid can't do that. He's going to go to grandma's house and grandma's going to give him Twizzlers. So I might as well just scrap the whole thing. I don't like that all or nothing thinking, because I think it really sets us up for failure or not even trying in the first place. Again, you don't have to be perfect to get the benefits of a therapeutic diet. Also in this article on ADDitude Magazine, it mentions common allergens. Now, this is something that can be really confusing. There are allergies and there are intolerances. They are two completely different reactions in the body that involve totally different antibodies. Allergies in general produce more rapid and severe reactions, whereas intolerances tend to come on more slowly and often involve milder reactions. Now, just because a food is a common allergen doesn't mean that everyone should avoid it. For example, eggs are one of the most common allergies, but many people tolerate them just fine, and they can be a fantastic part of your diet. So avoiding them simply because this article in ADDitude Magazine told you to avoid common allergens doesn't make sense. So ADDitude Magazine, just off the bat, we haven't even gotten past the sub-headline and I'm already pissed off. So let's see what ADDitude Magazine has to say in the actual article. Well, they start with protein, that old chestnut. Here they say to go for lean beef, pork, poultry, fish, eggs, beans, nuts, soy, and low-fat dairy products. Well, first of all, a lot of these are common allergens like eggs, nuts, and soy. So, they just contradicted themselves there because they also told us to avoid common allergens. Again, I'm not saying to avoid a food just because it's a common allergen. They are. If you have an allergy to something, yes, avoid it, but don't avoid a food just because it's a common allergen. That doesn't make any sense. So also notice they encourage lean beef, but they also encourage eggs. So what's the deal with that? Why is the fat in beef bad, but the fat in eggs is good? That doesn't make any sense, you guys. Get it together. Also notice they're pushing the low-fat dairy products too. Then they say, and I really cannot make this up, that you should try Think Thin protein bars, Lara bars, Raw Revolution bars, or Berry Blends fruit smoothies. Blends with a Z. These are all processed foods, you guys. I personally wouldn't include any of these in a healthy diet. At most, I would say these could be an occasional treat if you can eat just one. I know I can't. I used to buy boxes of Lara bars and eat the whole box in one sitting. All these things have sugar, artificial sweeteners, or both. They're desserts. So really, really bad advice. ADDitude Magazine, like, wow, horrible advice. It's almost as if you don't want us to get better. Then after that, there's a recommendation from Dr. Ned Hallowell about what to eat. Now, in general, I like what Dr. Hallowell has to say, but not when it comes to food. He says, quote, half of the plate should be filled with fruits or vegetables, 1/4 with a protein, and 1/4 with carbohydrates. Hallowell also advocates eating several servings of whole grains, which are rich in fiber, each day to prevent blood sugar levels from spiking and then plummeting. Okay, so this is pretty similar to the US government's My Plate recommendations minus the dairy. This is usually going to be a very high carb, low fat diet, which is going to leave most people very hungry after a couple hours. And it's just a bad idea. Okay, moving on. Finally, I did find something in this article from ADDitude Magazine that I agreed with. It's a miracle. The article says, quote, many diets are deficient in key vitamins, minerals, and fats that may improve attention and alertness, says Richard Brown, MD. He suggests that children and adults who have been diagnosed with ADHD be tested for nutritional deficiencies, end quote. Yep, I agree. Testing for nutritional deficiencies is a great idea if you're suffering from a mental health condition. However, if testing is not available to you right now or you just don't want to deal with it, please don't use that as an excuse not to get started on a new way of eating nutrient-dense whole food. You can always test later. The article goes on to mention some key nutrients that can help ADHD brains, or any brain for that matter. They list zinc, iron, magnesium, the B vitamins, and omega-3 fatty acids. And yes, these are all necessary for good brain health and can all be obtained from a proper human diet. Many people hear information about these nutrients and rush to buy supplements. The article mentions that the safest way to get the minerals that they mentioned, zinc, iron, and magnesium, is through diet. But it also encourages using multivitamins or multiminerals. Now, here's where it gets nasty. Check this out. Quote, if your child is a picky eater, or if he eats lots of takeout food, chips, and soda, he probably isn't getting the daily recommended value of vitamins and minerals. A daily multivitamin or multimineral will ensure that he does, no matter how finicky he is. I believe this is a very dangerous message. This idea that we can just eat absolute junk and then just throw a pill on top of it and everything will be fine, it's just not the way that it works. This is incredibly irresponsible advice. Shame on you, ADDitude Magazine. That was downright sloppy. They also mentioned the famous fish oil pill. If you've hung around me for a while, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of these things. For one, most of the time, by the time you actually swallow them, they've gone rancid. They've done quality control tests on these things. But even if you happen to get a fancy schmancy one and you store it properly and it doesn't go bad, it's not a panacea. You've probably heard of omega-3 and omega-6 acids. We need both of them, so one isn't good or bad per se. Omega-3 fatty acids are anti-inflammatory and omega-6 fatty acids are pro-inflammatory. Wait a minute, I hear you saying pro-inflammatory. Isn't that bad? Well, not necessarily. We do need some inflammation sometimes. Basically, these two types of fatty acids balance each other out and compete for the same pathways in the body. If you have too much omega-6, you can have too much inflammation and can have trouble healing. And unfortunately, most of us are getting way more omega-6 than omega-3 in our diet. This means that if you try balancing that out by throwing a little fish oil pill on top of it, it's probably not really going to work. Now, there are studies with high-grade fish oil supplements that do show some promise of this being a way of helping us with ADHD symptoms. But in my opinion, an easy way to correct the balance is to focus on getting as much of the junk out of there as you can and focus on eating whole foods, especially fatty cuts of meat. If you do those two things, you'll be way ahead of the pack. After recommending fish oil, the article goes on to say that herbs may help reduce ADHD symptoms. It says that herbs may increase blood flow to the brain, increase focus and concentration, and decrease aggressiveness. But it doesn't say which herbs they're talking about. So I feel like that paragraph was completely useless. And again, more crappy advice. So all in all, ADDitude Magazine, I think your article about what to eat and nutrition for ADHD was pretty bad. Now, another source of diet information about ADHD that I found online is on the website of a place called the ADHD Center. Now, the ADHD Center is an assessment and treatment clinic in the UK, and the advice on their website is militant. In their article about the 5 nutritional principles that every ADHD person should follow, rule number 1 is manage your calories. Do not overeat. And they have that written in all caps. Like, okay, do not overeat. Gee, thanks, I'm cured. Thank you so much. Like, seriously, guys? First of all, the whole calories thing is really not a good number to pay attention to. There's no calorie sensor in your body. There are companies like Coca-Cola that are trying to push the narrative that a calorie is a calorie. But I'm pretty sure that we can all agree that 500 calories of Oreos is not the same as 500 calories of eggs. It's not the calories, it's what your body and your brain do with the calories. And also the way they put the advice on the website is really mean and makes me feel bad about myself. Like, what the hell, you guys? I'm a sensitive soul. On this website, they also recommend drinking lots of water, which can be taken to an extreme. So I don't really like this advice either. They say to eat only high quality protein. They recommend salmon. Cool, but also skinless chicken breast. Boo. Eat the skin if you like it. It's good for you. Then they mention avocados, so they're a little bit confused about fat here because they're saying take the skin off your chicken breast, but eat that avocado. So they're mentioning low-fat stuff followed by high-fat stuff. They also mention vegetables such as spinach and broccoli, raw nuts, and beans, because things aren't hard enough with ADHD. We must also have serious room-clearing, nail polish removing farts, just to make life that little extra bit more miserable. Am I right? Now, I'm not railing on spinach and broccoli and raw nuts and beans per se, but to list them as high quality protein sources is shady. First of all, none of them are complete proteins, meaning that none of them have all the amino acids that we need, like animal products do. And the amino acids that they do contain are much less bioavailable than the amino acids in meat and other animal products, meaning that it's just harder for our bodies to get those amino acids out and use them. So, bad advice. Also, they say you should consume protein similar to how you take your medicine. Take it in small doses. That's just very vague and confusing. Then they say something that I agree with. Yay! They say to stop eating sugary foods. I totally agree, of course. That said, in the article, there's a little picture of candy. There's no mention of reducing the amount of juice that you drink, for example, which can also cause a lot of problems. So it's good, but in my opinion, incomplete advice here. And the last bit of nutrition advice on the ADHD Center's website is to eat the rainbow. Here we go again with that. As I said before, it's not necessary, and it's just another way to complicate your life and put more stuff on your to-do list. So, not really a fan of the ADHD Center's diet recommendations for ADHD. Fail. Super sloppy, guys. Do better. People take your recommendations to heart. All right, moving on. Let's see what they're saying on Instagram. I managed somehow not to get sucked into cat videos and actually look at informative content. All right, so on the Instagram account, ADHD.Nutritionist, she has a lot of advice. Now, she's a registered dietitian, so she should know what she's talking about, right? Well, I wish it weren't like this, but unfortunately, the guidelines that dietitians are taught to follow are these same crazy ones that push this high-carb shenanigans. And there's plenty of evidence of corruption within the dietetics space, including dietitians who have been paid to post things on their Instagrams, etc., saying that sugar is okay, this, that, and the other. I'm not saying that this particular dietitian has been paid off by sugar companies, but we have found evidence that some dietitians have been paid off to say that sugar is fine in moderation, to push the messages of all foods fit, everything in moderation, which, come on guys, it's time to admit that that's not working. So anyways, ADHD.Nutritionist says that you should eat every 3 to 4 hours. Yikes. If you're awake for 16 hours, that means eating up to 6 times a day. Let's look at all the reasons why this is terrible advice, especially for somebody with ADHD. First of all, those of us with ADHD have trouble with something called context switching. It's sometimes harder for us to go from one thing to another. You know what I mean if you've ever been working really hard on something and then it almost hurts to stop and then go eat or answer the phone or whatever, and then you got into that other thing and it almost physically hurts you to go back into the other thing. It's like this very difficult thing sometimes to switch from one thing to another. So this idea of stopping to eat up to 6 times a day and then starting up again with whatever I was doing before seems like absolute torture to me. Also, let's be honest here, eating so many times a day is more difficult to do with nutrient-dense foods. You're either going to have to do some serious prep work to make that a reality, be in the kitchen the whole day, or have a private chef or a family member that loves you very, very much. Am I right? If not, then you're very likely going to be leaning a lot on processed foods, unless you're just face down in a bag of pecans all day or something, which, while delicious, is lacking in some of the nutrients you need for optimal health. So not really a complete meal at all. Or I guess you could make a big meal and then just kind of nibble on it throughout the day. But that seems kind of sad to me, as I like eating until I'm properly full. In general, I'm not a big fan of snacking and eating these mini meals throughout the day, because depending on the food in the snack or the mini meal, eating frequently like this can keep our insulin levels elevated throughout the day, which can cause all sorts of issues. Another thing that ADHD.Nutritionist is a big fan of is, quote, normalizing processed food. Yikes again. Thumbs down, lady. Her argument here is that as ADHDers, we should be allowed to lean on processed food when we're not able to have whole foods. Now, an exception to this would be processed meat. I do think that processed meat can have a part in a healthy diet for many people, as long as it doesn't have too many fillers like soy protein, and as long as it doesn't have any wacky additives. But things like processed carbs, all those chips and cookies and energy bars and instant noodles, I don't think that should be normalized, because that stuff barely even counts as food in my book. And this ties back to the number of meals per day suggestion that she makes. If you're eating nourishing whole foods to satiety, then you'll probably find that you're just fine with having 1, 2, or 3 meals a day. So you won't need to be having 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however many meals a day like she's recommending. So this advice from ADHD.Nutritionist to eat frequently and allow yourself to eat junk food willy-nilly, dude, just no. Come on, man. You know better than that, don't you? All right, let's look at what they're saying on TikTok. When I opened TikTok, I wound up having a mini dance party. TikTok is dangerous. Then I calmed it down and typed in ADHD diet. Let's talk about what I found. The first TikTok I pulled up was by a woman who goes by the name of Chloe Goes Inward. She's currently creating an online course about holistic natural treatments for ADHD. She recommended a low-carb, high-protein diet. Close, Chloe, but no cigar. If you just do low-carb, high-protein, you're going to be so hungry, like I mentioned before. You need to replace the carbs with fat. She mentions that you should focus on foods that increase dopamine, which she says are protein foods. Okay, sort of. Protein contains the amino acids that we need in order to make dopamine. We make it mainly from tyrosine or phenylalanine, which converts to tyrosine, and both of these are indeed found in foods like meat. We can also make it from something called tyramine, which can be found in smoked or processed meats and some pickled or fermented foods. So protein is not going to give you an instant dopamine blast. But yes, certain amino acids in protein are necessary in order for you to make dopamine. So I'm not the biggest fan of the way she worded this, because a sugar binge can also give you dopamine. You can get a big old blast of dopamine if you binge on Skittles. However, this sugar binge can backfire over time, because overdoing it on sugar can lead to insulin resistance, and the insulin receptors in the brain play a part in dopamine uptake. So if these insulin receptors are overloaded from excess sugar, it's going to be harder to use the dopamine that's there, unfortunately. This can create a vicious cycle as we reach for more sugar to get the dopamine, but are meanwhile, in effect, wearing out our ability to use it. So in the TikTok video, I wish she had worded that better, because the reason to eat protein is to have the building blocks so that you can make dopamine, not to give yourself a quick hit of it. Does that make sense? By the way, feel free to comment with any questions, because I'm always happy to talk about this stuff, if you couldn't tell already. Okay, also in the TikTok video, Ms. Chloe recommends that we have complex carbs. You already know what I think about that advice. But then she goes on to say that if you're going to have simple sugars or eat refined carbs, you should have your vegetables or proteins first. I do agree with this, although I would go so far as to say have your protein first, or at least a few bites of it. Then you can go on to have your carbs or your sugar or whatever. This includes sugar in your drink. Try to keep the sweeter and starchier stuff towards the end of your meal. This helps a bit with blood sugar swings, although you know that my vote is to just skip the sugar and the starches altogether. But I agree with Chloe Goes Inward in that if you're going to eat it, do it after you've already gotten the good stuff in. Now, Chloe also mentions a number of foods that she says are good for people with ADHD, like oatmeal. Oh boy, guys, we gotta stop it with the oatmeal, seriously. Stop calling oatmeal a health food. It's not. Even if you get fancy steel-cut oats, you can still get a pretty decent bump in blood sugar from them. But if you think of the way most of us eat oatmeal, which is, first of all, a processed version covered in honey, fruit, maple syrup, brown sugar, whatever, most of us eat it more like a dessert. So I would never recommend oatmeal as a food to regulate blood sugar. By the way, fun fact, did you know that Quaker Oats is actually owned by Pepsi? Food for thought. All right, moving on. I also found another TikTok by Dr. Amin. He's a pretty controversial guy in the ADHD space. Some people love him. Some people think he's a quack. His nutrition advice is high protein, low carb. Here we go again. Not quite, Dr. Amin. Repeat after me, everyone. High fat, moderate protein, low carb. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, high protein, low carb will only make you what? Hungry. And you'll probably wind up converting most of that protein into glucose, thus defeating the purpose of eating low carb in the first place. Eat the fat, people. Dr. Amin's next piece of nutrition advice in the TikTok video is stimulant medication. Wait, what? That's not nutrition advice. Stimulants? Somebody get that man a dictionary. Then he goes on to rattle off a bunch of supplements like green tea, rhodiola, ashwagandha, and ginseng. Now, here's where this gets funny. In the background of his video are a ton of bottles of supplements that he sells. This rubs me the wrong way because I truly believe that supplements are meant to supplement a healthy diet. So how about a little more information on what we should eat before swallowing all those pills, Dr. Amin? I haven't done a deep dive into the research on herbal remedies for ADHD. However, I do want to say that any kind of medicine, whether herbal or not, needs to be approached cautiously, as no matter how natural a medication may seem, it still has the possibility for side effects. So I'm going to give Dr. Amin a big thumbs down on this one, but I am going to give him a thumbs up on one thing, and that is for his attempt to try to act. As he's talking in the video, he goes, stimulants can help, or stimulating herbs like green tea, da 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 da. And he goes on. He does his very best job of trying to act like this idea of like herbs just came to him just there. Meanwhile, behind him are all these like supplements and herbs and stuff. So, slow clap. Good job, Dr. Amin. You tried. Hey man, not everyone is a natural thespian. All right, and the last person I would like to talk about is an ADHD registered dietitian named Becca Harris. On her website, she has some tips about how to meal plan with ADHD. Her heart's in the right place with this article, but it includes information like make a list. So it's not really like earth-shattering stuff here, right? I'm sorry to laugh, but it's just like sometimes you see this online content and it reminds me of this time that I went camping with a bunch of friends and everyone was really hyper except for one guy who was really tired. And so at 2 a.m. we were all just chattering away and he just lost it and he turns to us in his sleeping bag and he goes, "Shut up! You guys are talking just to talk." So kind of got that vibe from this article. Like she's making an article just to make an article. There's no like good information in here. Sorry. Like make a list. Really? Gee, thanks. I'm cured. How many years of dietetics and mental health training did it take for you to come up with that very obvious piece of advice? Guys, do better. Mental health issues are a big deal. We're in the middle of a global mental health crisis. We need actual help, not Instagram-worthy vanity blog posts. Stop wasting everyone's time. All right, so aside from the fact that the meal planning article is lackluster, and I'm using the term generously here, Ms. Harris has a sample meal plan in the article. Now, she doesn't explicitly say that this is a good, nutritious week's worth of food for an ADHDer, but seeing as she's a registered dietitian, it's safe to say that most people would look at the meal plan and take it as a recommendation. And what she recommends, oh, what a surprise. God give me strength. It lines up very, very well with the US government's guidelines, which are a high-carb, low-fat diet. Really the opposite of what I recommend anybody with ADHD should eat. Some of the meals, and I use the term loosely, that she recommends include something like Cheerios with banana, walnuts, and chia seeds on top. Really. First of all, you do know that you can actually choke and die from eating chia seeds, right? I wouldn't sprinkle them on anything dry. They need to be soaked first, but meanwhile, Cheerios? Seriously? No. Its first ingredients are whole grain oats, which are no longer whole grain as they've been pulverized, and the cereal has so little nutritional value to it that they had to add a bunch of vitamins to it so that people would actually buy it. And these vitamins are not high quality vitamins at all. For example, they threw in some folic acid into the Cheerios, which is a synthetic form of folate, which many people cannot even use. Also on her sample meal plan, she has leftover movie theater popcorn. Now, I don't want to lump all of us ADHDers into one group. We are a diverse population with many different backgrounds and tastes, but I never left the movie theater with leftover popcorn. Am I the only one? I would get, even if I got the largest, like we're talking feed bag on a horse's head size bucket of popcorn for myself, I always finish the whole thing, often before the previews were done. But practicality aside, movie theater popcorn is one of the worst things you can put in your body as an ADHDer. First of all, corn can block zinc absorption. So if you're eating this along with other food, like say a hot dog, expecting to get some nutrients from your meal, forget about that. But also, movie theater popcorn usually contains synthetic dyes, yellow number 5 and yellow number 6, both of which have been linked to hyperactivity. Why on earth would you put it anywhere on a meal plan, especially for ADHDers? Another suggestion that Ms. Harris has on her meal plan is baked chicken, brown rice, and broccoli stir fry. While I am confused that the chicken appears to be baked and also stir fried, more importantly, this is the kind of meal recommendation that we've been hearing for decades that's very, very low fat and pretty high carb. Most people will feel hungry a few hours after something like this. Look around. Not everybody is trying to clean up their diet, but many people are. Many people have tried following these guidelines and have tried eating like this. And as a population, we're only getting sicker, and our collective mental health is worse than it's ever been. We need good food recommendations based in science now more than ever. So those are some of my thoughts about the most common advice we hear online about ADHD and nutrition. What do you think? How do you feel right now about your nutrition and its effect on your mental health? Please comment and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like more tips about ways to support your beautiful brain with food and other lifestyle changes, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for being here, and have a happy and healthy day.